to share my screen.
Okay. So I think I already make you the presenter, but maybe I will try another one. Okay. Because there are two.
There we go.
Okay.
All right. All right, can you guys see my screen here?
Yes, we can see your screen.
All righty. So thanks everyone for coming tonight. My name is Nate Pinkston. Just to give you a little background on myself, I am a longtime consultant. I have 5 years with Deloitte Consulting in their strategy and operations practice. While I was there, I led recruiting for their MBA and grad student acquisition at NYU. I also attended NYU myself and went through the process, so I'm familiar with it from both sides. And so what I'm going to be doing tonight is walking you guys through basically a set of tips and some real guidance on how to do case interviews and what you can do to really excel and practice and learn your style and improve and get ready for interviews at any major consulting firm. And so we're going to cover a variety of topics. We've got a lot of material to cover tonight, so I may go pretty fast. I'm going to look to Olivia to help me answer any questions that you guys come up with. You can either chat to her. I don't mind if you jump in and ask a question if you've got one. And then at the end of the whole presentation, there's some time for questions there too. So feel free to ask any there as well. So as we go through this, you'll see the agenda here. I'm going to give you a brief overview of case interviews and how to do them, what they are, and kind of generally what companies are looking for. We'll go through some specific types of cases. There's really not that many variables when it comes to the type of case. So I'll give you some information around the standard types of cases, what to look for, and how to best prepare for those. And then we're going to walk through the methodology of how you really do a case. We're going to go through how you set up things and respond to the opening question or framework. We'll talk about, as you go through the case, you get math and have to do a variety of analysis. That'll always be there in any type of case. It may be data and math. It may be sort of critical thinking and problem solving. So we'll talk about that. And then there'll be other types of questions that are more strategic. And these will be things that, could be more like a brainstorming or what are your general ideas around things. And so we'll talk about the best way to attack those. Finally, we'll talk about how do you wrap things up. For a lot of folks, this is sort of make or break that you spend not enough time prepping. And so the wrap-up and the recommendation, that's what you'll be leaving people with. So it's really important to spend some time and focus on that as well. And then I'll have some general tips and guidance on what you can do to continue preparing and working on your own. And I'm sure Olivia will also follow up with you guys and give you some resources and things on how she can help when it comes to getting these interviews. So let's jump in. And as I said, Olivia, please, if there are any questions, just let me know. So let's talk about case interviews and kind of what that means. So when companies do case interviews, it's an unnatural process. It's not something that really flows from the way people usually work or think about things. It's made to be a little different from how you would normally do an interview, to put a little more pressure on people, to really drive at how they're going to think and what that thought process looks like under certain business scenarios. And so the two main things that people are going to be looking for is the analytical skills around how you problem solve, and the interpersonal skills of when you're speaking to them and presenting your thoughts to them, how is it that you convey yourself, what does that confidence level look like? And what they're really doing for these is trying to look for those skills that are most critical to consulting. So the analytical skills, this is going to drive towards what you would do in a day-to-day helping to solve cases or engagements, how you would work through analytics. If you were actually on a client engagement, how quick on your feet are you? When you get problems, what is your thought process like and how do you approach those? The interpersonal skills are really critical because those go towards working with clients. And it's a big thing to, it's one thing to just be smart and be able to say, well, I can critically problem solve, but consulting is a very client-focused business. And so it's almost as important how you interact with the client while you're solving their problem and providing them with information as it is how correct or valuable what it is you're presenting. And I say this just to really focus on, what it is you can do that's going to help you do both of these at the same time. And it's difficult. Casing is not as I mentioned, not a natural process. But what that means is it's a learned and practiced process. And so no matter how good are you at this kind of thing today, with practice and a little bit of effort and work, you can become really good at this. And so that should really hearten anyone who's going into this process. It's not something that either you have it or don't have it. Anyone can learn this. So let's dig into what they're really looking for. So math and quantitative skills I touched on a few times. This is something they'll have you solve math problems. They'll look for you to work through some kind of analytics. This could be in your head or on scratch paper, but there'll always be math portions. Framing and organizing is key as well. This is something that I personally didn't understand what they meant initially, but what they're really looking for is how do you set things up? And I'm going to bring this up a lot of times, but you should really be thinking back to what it is that they do in consulting for a living. And so presenting, framing, setting things up is really key because you're not going to be doing stuff on a white sheet of paper for clients. You're going to be doing it in Excel and PowerPoint. And so if you're already thinking and showing them that you operate in those kind of same types of thought processes with tables and clearly laid out formulas, this is really going to be a good mark to show you can do these things and frame them appropriately. Certainly prioritizing is going to be key because then they throw a lot of information at you. In fact, cases are designed to have information you don't need. They'll give you more information just like a company. So it won't be really linear like here's A and here's B and that's going to equal C. It's going to be here's A through Q and you need to get to an answer X and Y. And that is only going to take 3 of the inputs, but I'm going to give you 10 or 15 that are not important, but you have to know that. And that, again, is just something that takes practice that you can learn. So that goes right to relevant information, what is important and what isn't, and then drawing conclusions from that. So when you see something that is relevant, what are the insights you take from it? So for companies, some companies will use data sheets, and when they give you those data sheets, what they're really doing is saying, how are they going to process this information? Are they going to identify what's important and then take out some insights that are, conclusions around, some kind of, this leads me towards an answer. And lastly, when we get to key implications and next steps, this is really how does this play in whatever the overall question is that you've been given. And that is the heart of solving a case, is there'll be some question you're driving towards, and you want to make sure you get there and answer that. When it comes to interpersonal skills, I mentioned think about presenting to clients. In the room, they're really kind of like a client. They're part interviewer, part partner or coworker or colleague, and part client. And they're looking for that presence and that energy level. How do you conduct yourself? Do you have good listening? Are you speaking and clearly presenting the issues? Or are you rambling and kind of not getting to a point very quickly? I'll talk a lot about being succinct and driving home specific messages that you want them to take away from things, and how you present and structure even your answers is going to be important. Confidence is really key. This is a process, as I mentioned, that is meant to add stress, that is meant to be out of your comfort zone. And so maintaining confidence is really key. I've been in cases where I was interviewing someone and they messed up the math. And a lot of people would freak out at that moment, or when they realized it was off, they wouldn't handle it well, and that might tank their whole case. But this person actually identified it. They said, oh gosh, you know what? I messed up the math here. What I need to do is X and Y to fix it. And they did, and actually that showed a lot more poise and confidence. And I thought that was even better than if they just gotten it right in the first place. And so lastly, it's how quick are you on your feet, because they're going to throw curveballs at you. They're going to look sort of disrupt your normal thought process. No matter how much you practice, they're going to be looking for ways to throw something extra to see how you handle that stress. And practice will help you be able to devote a lot of your mind to just solving the problem like you would the hundreds of other cases, or maybe not hundreds, but dozens of other cases you've done, and be able to devote towards being creative and thinking of new solutions. So one of the things that I'm going to talk a lot about, and we're going to come back to these throughout the presentation, because these are the things that you're going to have to do in any case. And long, short, first round, second round, it's really going to follow this formula. There'll be a piece at the beginning where they're going to give you a problem statement. You need to be able to listen, clarify what's going on, and make sure you understand how the client or pretend client is trying to deal with something that's facing them. And that's going to lead you to a variety of analysis and questions that will hopefully answer that problem and somehow get to a recommendation that's going to solve the problem. But to do that, once you understand what the problem is, you're going to have to develop an approach. And an approach can take a few different forms, but really what I'm getting to is a framework. And we'll get to this in a few minutes, but when we go into consulting, how we solve something is often very customized from client to client. And so this is to understand, how do you attack and approach problems? What kind of frameworks do you go through? Are you good at thinking through a structured and logical approach, pulling different pieces from where you need it? But the approach is important because it's kind of like your project plan. And in any consulting project, you have a plan, you're going to follow your plan, and that's going to guide you to know what you're going to do throughout the program or project. And so developing your approach to answer whatever that problem statement is key, and that's going to be your framework. As I mentioned, that's going to then bring you to analyzing some kind of data. When I say data, I mean math, but I also mean strategic problem solving. This could be, like I said, brainstorming. It could be, what are some options? Tell me about some risks. What are some creative ideas that you've got? It'll take different forms, but it is part of your analysis. And this will be, in long cases, this may actually be 2, 3, 4 really distinct portions of the case. When you get to command and control ones, they may have specific things that seem not even to be relevant to the initial problem statement. But you're going to have to work through however many there are. And then at the end, roll all of that data and analysis that hopefully got some good insights that are relevant to the problem statement, and that's when you're going to present your findings. And this is your recommendation. This is, what is it that they should do to solve for this problem? Whatever it is the client is facing, how do you think they should tackle it? And so this is really your wrap-up and recommendation. Now, speaking back to your presentation skills and your interpersonal skills, throughout all of this, you'll do your best if you are treating it as if you're working with this person to solve it. If you treat them like they're an interviewer and you're trying to seek their approval, they're going to feel like they should be judging and evaluating every move you make. If you treat them like a coworker and you're engaging with them, you're walking them through your thought process, but also asking them questions throughout, making it more of this dialogue and a discussion, they're going to start to get involved with you. They're going to be more engaged. And the other key thing here is, most times, you're going to be interviewing with someone who's doing a variety of these throughout the day. Sometimes you may be the only one, but they may have had some throughout the week. It's not their core job to be doing case interviews, and so you want to make it interesting. You want to keep them engaged. Otherwise, afterwards, they're not going to remember you, or they're going to think, get bored. They'll pull out their phones and they'll always have emails they can check. So the more energetic and engaging you are, the more they're going to be engaged, remember you well, and think, this is somebody I could see as a coworker. So let's talk about different types of cases. So as I mentioned, there's really not that many different ones. There's a variety of problem statements for different industries, different things, but they end up falling into some pretty standard buckets. And if you do a lot of practice cases, you'll start to develop a technique and a method, an approach for solving each of these different types. And I'll go back to this again, practice, practice, practice. But the more you can practice these different types, the more you can be prepared for when they give you a profitability case, you'll know right away when they say profitability, okay, I'm going to do these different, profitability is revenues and costs. Revenues is price times volume. I'm going to take into account product mix and customer segmentation, and on cost, it's fixed and variable. I'm going to think about capital expenditures, I'm going to think about labor, and I'm going to think about, supply chain inputs, COGS. You'll have these standard things ready to go, and so with practice, you won't even have to spend a lot of time thinking about your framework. You already know basically what it is, and then you're able to customize it more. So trying to learn a variety of these is going to be really helpful to you. And I put these in order of how frequently I think they're given as, at least in my experience, having done this for, like I said, 5+ years, being on both sides of it. I think this is sort of the order you should learn them in, but the frequency with which I've seen them in the market. And so profitability is the main one. It's by far the most common. If you guys get case books, work with different case libraries and things, you'll see profitability is the most common. And this is exactly what I mentioned. You want to get down to profitability is revenues minus costs. Revenues are price and volume, costs are fixed and variable, and you add some other factors in. The next one you'll hear a lot is a market size case. And this can take a couple different forms. But the idea for market sizing is this is when they like to do something where they're not going to give you a lot of data. And so you'll hear things like, how many cars were sold in the US last year? Or this is an old one which is so outdated it's laughable. How many payphones are in New York? These are the kinds of things that are theoretical and may seem silly. I personally got one. How many flights are in and out of JFK Airport every day? And it's simple. It's just a really basic thing that walks you through different ways to solve problems. But the idea is you want to get good at market sizing without the input of any information. So when it comes to market sizing, you want to get really comfortable with some basic assumptions around population. You guys may do cases in a number of different organizations, but I spend most of my time working in the U.S. There's a bunch of standard U.S. metrics that folks tend to rely on. So population is probably the biggest. You can assume almost any consumer-based product is going to be driven by population. So when you think about U.S. population, you'll hear either it's around 320 million or so, and then you can say, okay, 320 million means if I do an even distribution of ages 1 to 80, then that's 4 million people per any age range. So if I am doing a problem where it's 18 to 25-year-olds or 21 to 40-year-olds, whatever it is, now I can say 4 million times whatever number of years I need to. Boom, I've got a number of potential customers in that market size. Makes things really easy. And so that's why you want to get to know at least a few of those basic metrics. The other thing that I'll get to when we get to math is you want to set up some easy numbers. So when I said 320 evenly dispersed 1 to 80 equals 4 million. That's an easy one, but you want to set up some easy numbers that you'll have in your head. The next one is market entry and product launch. This could take a few different forms here, but it'll be we're looking to grow. What can we do to launch a new product to these new customers or existing product to these customers? What can we do to go into this new region, which is could be a new country, could be a new area in an existing country, could be anything really, but it'll take the form of some new market, new product that you have to analyze, and this one could involve some market sizing as well. But in general, when you hear that, new product, growth, market entry, that's what you want to go for, which sort of leads me to growth strategy. So growth strategy could be a new way to grow. This might leave a little more open room to be creative. But for growth strategy, there's a number of different things you can do. Could be new product or new markets, but it could be selling more to existing customers as well. So you want to sort of know that the two main ways to grow is you can sell more to your existing customers, or you can sell to new customers, or some combination of the two. And for that, those are pretty standard ways to approach it, but you want to make sure you're looking at both. That may also involve some portion of market share. If you're attacking a new market or growing, what is market share going to be? So that'll touch on that as well. M&A, especially if folks are looking at financial service-based consulting firms, niche consulting firms that focus on just M&A are really big right now, and M&A is a big field, growing a lot. So these will be a go, no-go decision of some kind. Should we buy this company? Might be sell off a business, a unit, so it's actually divestiture as opposed to an acquisition. But either way, these ones tend to involve some kind of valuation. They may have more financial statements in these. So if you're doing something that's in the financial services industry or M&A, you should get a little bit familiar with financial statements, because you may find they're going to slide one in front of you, and you'll need to be able to do some basic ratios, be able to at least look at it and not get intimidated. Turnaround strategy is a little more high level. There's a failing or declining business. This could actually be morphed with profitability, but in general, this may be one where it's really looking for some creative thinking on how you turn around something, or it could be something that's internal looking, where you look at a few business units and are looking at profitability or efficiency within those business units. And so that one is one that comes up a lot as well. And then for the last two technical cases, this is really would be specific if you're looking at a specific type of firm. I mentioned financial services. Maybe you're going to look at life sciences and want to join healthcare or pharmaceuticals. So you may have specific knowledge you need around something for those. If you're going to a niche firm, they may have something that's a little more on the technical side, so you need to know a little bit more around that. I don't specifically mean it could be like an IT situation if you're going to like an IT consulting or technology consulting side. But if you are doing interviews for a company that is really specific in what they do, you should know about that and assume the case will come from that type of industry. And then lastly, I talk about mix of cases because they can be a mix of some of these, but typically cases that are going to be a mix are going to be those later round cases, round 2 or 3 depending on the firm. And so really, if you learn 1 through 6, you're going to be pretty well prepared to do almost anything. And you can do, if you know 1 through 6 well, you can really do a mix of these pretty easily. So these are the different types of cases, and these are the things that I would look for and specifically focus on if you're practicing. So let's talk about how you actually do a case. So jumping in, everyone has a different format that they like. Different schools teach different things. Different books will tell you how to do it differently. I'm going to walk you through my methodology, which I like and think works well. You can easily adapt this. They're not going to judge you if you do something different. But the way I like to set this up, and you'll see us sort of set up, this is like a clean white piece of paper. And then we're going to use the left-hand side for notes, develop a framework on the top right, and wrap things up with the recommendation coming back to your first sheet of paper on the bottom. I like this and the layout I'm going to walk you guys through. I've developed because it really drives towards that element of showing them something that looks familiar, treating it like a real client engagement, and making your pages of paper like PowerPoint slides, which is how they communicate. All consultants communicate in PowerPoint all the time, and so if they see something that looks like a PowerPoint slide, they're immediately going to say, this person gets it, they get how to communicate, they use the same kind of tools we do. So when you first get a case, if you have a clean white piece of paper, what I recommend doing is drawing a line on the left, and then any notes, as they go through the problem statement, you take on that left-hand column. And if it's a long problem statement, you might need more than that, but in general, you segment an area where you can do all the notes and then really drive towards the problem statement, but it's somewhere you can refer back to, especially as you're doing your framework. So they'll give you a problem statement. They'll say, we have a client who has declining profitability and they're looking to understand what they can do to increase their profitability in this unit. So you'll take these notes, you'll say things like, do they have any goals? Do they have any metrics that they're going to judge a profitability or be striving for? Timelines of investment or ROI. You can ask those questions, get your notes, and you'll say, okay, can I have a minute to collect my thoughts? And what that means is a sort of code for, I'm going to take a minute or two, and I'm going to draw and write out a framework. Now, as you read, and I do recommend, casebooks are a good foundation, so they're worth, if you don't have some other peers around you that can help, casebooks can be a good start, and they'll talk about a lot of frameworks, and they'll provide a lot of examples. You guys have probably heard of things like Porter's 5 Forces and the 3 C's and the 4 P's, and a lot of different frameworks that you can use. And here's the thing, you don't want to just use those blindly. When I say a framework here, what I really mean is picking and choosing the pieces from all the frameworks that are out there and developing something that works for you or for this case. And it'll be different, across those different types of cases, but you can develop some standard frameworks that are going to work well for you. I mentioned the profitability one already. It could be a supply chain based one. It could be a Porter's 5 Forces that mixes the 3 C's and one of the 4 P's in there. Whatever it is, you draw on a bunch of different elements to create something that's going to help you solve that problem statement and use the specific pieces that make sense. If I did a case and I was casing someone and they were like, okay, I'm going to do the Porter's 5 Forces, well, probably 2 or 3 of the 5 forces are completely irrelevant here, and something in the problem statement probably identified that that's it, true. So I don't want you to spend time going down 2 avenues that are a complete waste of our time. It's a half-an-hour interview or a 45-minute interview or an hour-long interview, whatever it is. We got a limited amount of time. So don't give me just a canned framework. Do something that's a little more specialized. So as we go through this, I'll come back to recommendations at the end, but this becomes your project plan. This is that approach I mentioned in the beginning. You develop the approach and work through it. And I actually talked a lot through this already, but excuse me, forgive me for talking more than going through the slides. But just to recap here, for listening and clarifying that first stage, this is the notes here, doing all the things where you're finding out what the client goals are. You're recording any key numbers. That could be metrics they're looking for. That could be how fast they're growing or what their revenue is, and what it is that could be driving whatever the problem statement is, key facts. And so you have the room to ask questions here. You have the room to pry a little bit, but you want to save most of the analysis-based stuff for later. And then that approach, this is the framework I mentioned. This is your project plan. And what's important about this, beyond all the things I just said, is this is then your guide for working through the case. So once you develop the framework here, this is going to help you if you get stuck later on in the case. And too often people do these, and it's sort of like they're checking a box. They don't go back and look at their framework if they ever get stuck. And so what I tell people is, once you've done your framework here, put this page in front of you, maybe above where you're writing, and go look at it. If you ever get stuck, refer back to it. Make sure, number one, you're answering the questions, but also, if you're in one of those strategic questions they're giving you, brainstorming, look back to your framework and use it. You spent some time on it. It's probably the only time in the case where you're going to be able to sort of sit silently and work for a minute or two, where you're not trying to engage the person. And so I think it's really key to develop a good framework and refer back to it. Don't lose sight of it. So here's a handful of examples of the different frameworks that you may see. This is not an exhaustive list, but it's some of the ones that you may want to pull from. Again, let me stress, don't just pull one of these frameworks and use it. You want to use different pieces. And so what makes most sense? It could be, strengths and weaknesses. It could be pros and cons. It could be a mix of that with part of Porter's 5 Forces because it's got a competitive element. Just knowing some of these things is going to be helpful to start building your own set of frameworks. And you can get a lot of these online, a lot of them are in the books, but in general you want to be able to pull different things from a lot of these to develop your own framework for any given case. So once you've got your framework, what do you do? So you've already developed your framework, and now you're going to have to analyze some data. This comes in a couple different forms. So there's open-ended cases and command and control. Open-ended cases typically are going to be ones where they have a problem statement and they may or may not have a ton of extra information, but they're going to let you drive the case. The open-ended ones, after they've given you the problem statement, they're going to look for you to say, okay, here's my framework. The first avenue that I want to start exploring is, revenue. And so what do we know about where the revenue is currently coming from, what their products or sales look like? You're going to be the one who starts to ask these questions. And so for open-ended, you're going to be the driver. For command and control, it's not going to work that way. It's going to be, okay, here's the problem statement. The first thing I want you to do is think about all the factors that are currently affecting them. And so then you answer that question. Once you do, they say, okay, here's a data sheet that I want you to calculate what their earnings per share is going to be. And then you answer that question, and they'll be like, okay, now what I want you to do is actually encountering this new piece of data we've got, you need to brainstorm for me what some strategic actions they will consider for how to solve this other problem I never mentioned prior to this moment. And they'll lead you through it, and they'll guide it. The thing is, firms typically have a strategy to either do one or the other. So McKinsey's command and control. Deloitte is command and control. Most of the other big firms are going to be more open-ended. But you want to check with online, just Google, what type of cases do these firms give. Almost all firms will have an example case on their website, at least the big ones. And so you can look at that case. Is it the kind of thing where it's open-ended, so you know you're going to drive it? Is it command and control, in which case they're going to drive it? You want to know going in, so you just know how to tailor your approach. But what kind of data are you actually going to be analyzing? This, again, could take a few different forms. It could be a couple different questions, but I think you treat it like a slide. For each question they give you, use a fresh sheet of paper and do it like a slide. If it's a math question, what I recommend is setting up the formula on the piece of paper almost like you're writing it in Excel. So I'm going to take input 1, multiply it by input 2, subtract input 3, and divide it by input 4. And then once you've laid the formula out on the page, then you start putting the numbers in. A lot of people jump to the math right away and they want to show how quick and fast thinking they can do math. And the trick with that is, I don't know how you're thinking and approaching this process. So if you lay out the formula for me, I can see exactly how you're going to set it up. I can know, for instance, that I can trust you if you were going to do it in Excel on your own. And I can see some logical, structured process for how you're going to attack the problem. Also, I've been in scenarios where we're pressed for time, and if they set up the math problem, I've said, okay, we don't even need to do the math because you're going to have a calculator, you're going to have Excel, you're going to have these other tools, so if I know you can set it up right, let's just assume you got the right answer. And so I've let people skip it. So the other piece here is when you jump in and start doing math, a lot of people, because they may not be good at it or they may be doing it in their head, they get quiet and they stop engaging the interviewer. Well, remember, let's go back to those interpersonal skills. You need to be impressing upon them. It's part getting the right answer, but it's part how you get to it, how you manage the interview, the case solving, and engage that person. So walk them through your thought process. Talk them through what you're doing. Not only is it more engaging, but if you start to make a mistake, they can catch it. They can see where it is. The interviewer is not sitting there doing the math with you. The case has given them a solution. And if you end up with a different number and they don't see how you did it, they're going to have no idea whether you did correct math but put the wrong inputs in, whether there's something that you accounted for that's even more impressive than the person who wrote the case for them. But so if you walk them through it, they can know what's going on. They're going to be both engaged and can know if there's some piece they need to account for that's when you get a different answer. Now, when I talk about making this a slide, part of that means keeping it as clean as possible. So that means making tables to put answers into. That means laying out formulas cleanly. That means not being super messy. So I think people should use scratch paper if they need to use it. I used it when I did all my interviews. It doesn't detract. It's a separate piece of paper you can use and not have to worry if it starts to look messy or anything. It's a scratch piece of paper. You've got a clean page that has a table or where you can circle your answers and the takeaways. So treat it like a slide and use as much paper as you need. There's no limit. Make sure you're all bringing a stack of paper with you and use as much of it as you want. And don't try to cram too many things on one page. Same thing for scratch paper, keeping it clean. Don't put 4 questions all on the same page. If you start to fill up the page, use another one. Or do each math problem on a different page. Whatever it is, you got as much as you want. So for this, you'll see the stuff on the left-hand side is what they're looking for. But the idea is they're looking at how you connect the dots. They're looking through your thought process. It's going to lead to, can I trust this person to set up and do math problems in Excel and analyze data and pull out the correct insights once I have them on a project team. And so it's really thinking about it as if you're solving some piece of the client issue. And ultimately, all of these lead back to that problem statement at the beginning. What insights or evidence does it give towards a way to solve whatever the problem statement is? Was there 2 options presented that now this is clearly giving you an indication option 1 is better than option 2? Whatever it is, make sure you're keeping the problem statement in mind. And if there's a key insight, make sure you're going to come back to it. Maybe even write it on your first piece of paper, or put it somewhere you can see it for later so you can link and connect those dots later. So that covers math, but you also get these strategic questions. And this is part of the data piece too, because data isn't always what we think of as data and numbers. Data could be, here's some variety of customer preferences, and we don't necessarily know if there's percentages behind them. We just collected these data in focus groups or something like that. So these take a few different forms. You often hear brainstorming. You often hear them say, give me a creative solution to something, or what are some ideas you have around this? And the trick is, this is doing some of the same things. What are some of the insights you can pull out of this information? It could be brainstorming where you're providing the data, so to speak, from either your own life experience or whatever you think logically would be the right answer. But for this, just like in the beginning, you want to structure your answer. You want to think through this as, okay, can I do a mini framework? Can I think of buckets that this fits into? Is there something that'll make this seem like a clear structure around how I'm attacking the problem? Because people start to brainstorm and they go all over the place. Big piece of feedback I give folks is, when you're doing the math, you're furiously writing. You've done your framework, you're furiously writing. You get one of these strategic questions like, what are some thoughts on how you might solve this? Then people put their pen down and they look off in the clouds and they start going all over the place. And I'm like, no, don't do that. Stay just as structured as you were for the math and that opening framework. Go back to the framework if you need to, but walk through a very structured answer. Because if you're going all over the place, that tells me you're not thinking through a logical thing. There's a term in consulting that they use all the time called MISI, mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive. And eventually, you're probably not going to be able to do it in one of these interviews, but you want them to be able to drive towards something like that where there's not overlap between potential options they're saying, and they're covering the whole universe of what those potential options are. And so if you're doing it in a logical way, that tells you, are you solving for all the buckets that are going to be important? So I really encourage people to write things down, think about some frameworks that they can use that may apply to just this one piece of it. You probably can't take, a few quiet minutes to do a big framework, but if you know a lot of these frameworks in your head, you're thinking through what the business implications are, you should be able to come up with a logical way to solve this problem, which should be approached just like the math formula. Show me how you're thinking. I want to see how you're going to get me from point A to insight B, and really understand what you're doing and how that applies to the problem statement overall. So for these, it may be a little bit more fuzzy, but you want to stay structured and on point as possible. So once we've solved for all the data, we've got like 2 or 3 questions. Maybe we've been driving it, and so we've done a variety of avenues that we've looked at through our framework, all these different things. Now we've got to the end, and we're going to have to wrap things up, give our recommendation. So this is sort of the classic, they're stretched for time. They'll say like, all right, one at a time, the CEO walks in, what do you tell him? This is your presenting of the findings. And for me, I really like to go back to that first page. The first page I talked about where your notes are on the left and you have your framework in the top right-hand half or 2/3 of the page. And the reason I like to do that is because the most critical thing in presenting your findings is answering whatever the problem statement was. It all needs to link back to some issue that they were facing, something that was troubling the company, something that you have been driving to with all of the analysis and all the data you've been collecting and finding insights from. And so you want to make sure you're answering that question. So when it comes to recommendations, the reason I like the CEO analogy is because you also need to be structured here. You've heard me say it for each of these categories, but you need to be structured and on point. You need to be succinct. You need to present the information in such a way that it shows you can talk to clients and you can give them what's really important. So you lead with the headline. There was that problem statement, and the first thing you need to do is answer whatever the problem statement was. A lot of people like to do sort of walk you through everything they've done, but if we don't have time for that, what happens if I cut you off after you've been talking for 30 seconds and you never gave me the answer? Start with the answer. Lead with the headline and tell me what does the company need to do? What is the recommendation going to be? If the CEO actually walked in, he doesn't want to sit there and listen to how you went through all your analysis and processes. He doesn't even care. He wants to just hear what is the answer. Then you add in the backup. Then after you've given that headline, you support it with the evidence you gathered during your analyzed data phase. You give them, all right, here's 3 bullet points from my analysis that back up the recommendation that I give. Here's, the math portion that gives me financial backing. Here's the strategic portion that gives me higher level thinking. But back it up with your analysis after the headline. I love to do a 3-point analysis. So it's like, here's my recommendation and here's the 3 reasons why it's correct. That can feel a little but figure out your own method. But the idea is, here's the answer, here's why the answer is right. And then a lot of people end there, and I think they miss out on kind of going from a good to a great interview. And so when they finish up with that case recommendation, then you have an opportunity to throw in some extra creative stuff to make yourself stand out as a candidate. And risks and next steps are classic ways to do that. That gives you a chance to say why, even though you've only gotten a little bit of data and you've been talking for half an hour, actually you need to think about these risks because there's some other factors that if I had more time or if this was a real engagement, we would have spent time looking at this data. So throw that stuff out there. This is also a time you can hedge your bets. If it wasn't like a really strong set of analysis to back up your recommendation, if you didn't get like a silver bullet for the answer, throw in those risks and say, I'd want to do further analysis into this piece, and this piece. These are the areas that if we had more time. And that leads you right to next steps. And so it can be risks for why this may or may not ultimately turn out to be a great solution, and then next steps of all the other things you wish you could do. But risk and next step kind of round out your answer so it's not just what was on the page. And that's always, if you're an interviewer, you'll have, here's a good answer, here's a great answer. That's given to them, And risks and next steps is what elevates someone from good to great. So throughout this, you've had all these findings, followed your structure hopefully, answer the question, engage them throughout it. You've led them to the key information and given them a wrap-up that is the last piece of their impression of you. And so it's really important to finish strong here. This is why I say don't ignore it. It may seem simple and obvious that you've done this analysis, but if you don't finish strong, you may have had, again, great information, great analysis, really good at math, good at strategic thinking, but if you leave them with sort of a poor ending, that's what they're going to take away in their heads as they go to the next interview, as they write their notes on how the interview went, and as they debrief later in the day. It's going to be that last impression. So make sure you're finishing strong, you're confident, you're engaged. The interpersonal skills, I can't stress enough for this final phase. So I want to talk about some general tips, and then we'll leave some time for questions. I've talked about this being a skill you can learn, and practice, practice, practice is the best way to learn it. Typically, what I recommend is if you're a student, grab a couple friends, put together a little group. You guys can case each other. If you've got even one other person who's going through the process with you, you can both get a lot of value. You schedule an hour. You do a case for 25 minutes, and they give you some feedback, and then you case them for 25 minutes, give them some feedback. There's your hour. Time it. They'll have different styles. You'll learn a lot from different people, and the more diverse experiences, the more diverse skill sets, the better you're going to be for whoever you walk in and see an interview with. Which leads me to alumni. Alumni from your schools or the consulting firm field in general, they can give you great insider tips. But when I was going through the process, my first year, I thought, all right, I'm good at casing. I'm casing with my friends a lot, and I'm doing pretty well. So I think I'm going to be good in the interview. Then I went to the interview, and I was like, wow, I didn't know how much I didn't know. I didn't really know what the process was like, and so I didn't do nearly as well as I expected. And once you've been through the process, if you've got someone who's working in consulting, they're just going to know better what it's like and be able to give you more honest feedback of how you can improve and what that firm in particular is looking for. And lastly, you know, I mentioned it before, bring paper, have pens. It's always the worst if somebody rolls into an interview and they're not prepared. So you need to have copies of your resume, you need to have blank sheets of paper, you need to have pens for, you know, in case even one runs out of ink, maybe a pencil as a total backup, whatever it is your style, but come prepared. And the execution tips, these are really things that hopefully as you practice, you'll be able to think about and do more and more of these. But relax. I mean, you know, the interviewer isn't there to like just screw with you. It may feel like that because casing is so unnatural, but the truth is they're looking for good people that are going to be their colleagues. So at the end of the day, if they find someone good, they want you to really have enjoyed it because they want you to come work there. So remember, you know, they're not looking to screw you. They'll try and help you. When I gave interviews, I wasn't there to just find places where they went wrong. I'd help them and try to give them, you know, tips or steer them in the right direction when I could. Maintaining your composure, I mean, this goes back to a lot of what I said before about making it a conversation, making them feel like they're working with a colleague. All those interpersonal skills are key. Don't just jump to the answer. Even if you feel like you know what it is, an important piece is how you got there and thought through it, because they really are looking for how you think. And so that's why you need to walk them through it. Even if you know what the answer is, then it should be really easy to walk them through it and spend time on those interpersonal skills. But then you understand how you thought about things, how you approached it, how you got to your answer. Otherwise, it doesn't really do any good. Because you may not know right away what the answer is if they put you on a consulting project, so they need to know how you think. Questions, honestly, it's not a bad thing to say, okay, I'm thinking about solving something this way. Does that sound right? I want to make an estimate. Is that estimate okay? So, you know, the best thing to do is propose something and then see if that's an okay thing to do. But if you've got real questions, don't sit there and be silent. If you don't know what to do, own up to it and say, I'm a little stuck here. If you have any thoughts on how to proceed, offer them up. But you don't want to sit there quietly. If you're stuck, you don't want to sit there thinking too long if you don't know what to do. Engage them. Ask them questions when you need to. I mentioned before, but write everything down. I think it's really helpful that when you're writing, you can force yourself to be a little more structured than that open brainstorming. So writing things down, circling key numbers, underlining them, putting a place for key insights can all be helpful. And the last one is just going back to that problem statement. Too often, people end up not answering the question. And that's an immediate ding, an immediate red flag. If they've forgotten what the problem statement was and they're not answering the question, then what we're doing. So, in general, that's kind of a really fast overview. We went through a lot of things. I'm going to leave it open for some questions, and Olivia, let me know if we've been getting some that I can start with. I'll also actually flip back, now that we're in Q&A, I'll flip back to the frameworks because a lot of times folks want to write these down. So I'll leave this slide up, but we're at the Q&A portion, so let me know what kind of questions you guys have. What can I answer before we wrap things up for the evening? Olivia, do we have anything on the chat?
Yes. So we have one question coming from Susie, and she asked that, can we still apply for the summer internship for non-US MA students?
Is that for Deloitte? I'm not sure. Every company is different. So I'm not sure what the question is driving to. Maybe, Susie, if you're there, you can clarify which internships you're curious about.
Yeah, Nate, do you mind me unmute Susie? Maybe she can raise the question via voice so that it can be more direct.
Are you online? Feel free to unmute and ask questions.
Okay, Susie, I just unmute you. So if you have any questions, you can ask Nate directly.
If we don't have any, what I can talk about is generally internships, the recruiting process, and I honestly could do a whole other hour on just the process and how to get a job in consulting, and could do one-on-one sessions as well. But there's two main ways to get into consulting firms. There's going to be the campus recruiting, and there's going to be the general open application. The thing to know is the general open application is a lot harder because there's thousands and thousands of people that apply to those, any online posting. And so recruiters sifting through thousands of those resumes, they may never get to yours. The campus process has people that are going to be a lot more engaged and devoted to a specific number of slots often. So it's a smaller pool you're competing with, and there's a lot more attention to it. Most consulting firms will, for graduate school programs, they'll do a year or so before graduation, depending on the program. So like business school, 2-year program. The first year, they'll recruit for summer internships in the fall and typically interview at the very beginning of the year, January, February, and then make offers for that upcoming summer. Then the full time, the fall, they'll recruit early on for those campus roles, and they'll make offers in October, November, December for the following year. So that's sort of a general timeline. I don't know if Susie's on and wanted to ask something more specific.
Okay, Nate. So we have another question from Ren, and I wanted to know that any online resource to recommend to do the case practice?
Sure. So there's no specific online resource that I think is really great. There's a lot of message boards and advice that people will give you. I think the advice that they're going to give that are going to be written or online tools, even videos and things like that on Skillshare or something like that, you can see some of these things that are videos. But the truth is, doing it with a person is the best way to do it. So as far as online resources, what I think is most valuable are case books and getting practice cases that you can practice on your own, hopefully with someone else. But truthfully, it's going to be practicing yourself that's going to really improve your skills. For some of the things you can do without other people, so when I'm mentoring specific people, I often have them just look at the newspaper headlines and take that as a problem statement and then do a framework and do a case right from that if you need practice cases. But in general, there's a lot of noise out there, so there's nothing that I think is, at least to my knowledge, risen to the top as a really good resource, and practice is still going to be your best option. Any more? Feel free to jump on the phone, folks. Well, I'll add a couple other thoughts, I guess, just to round things out. If we don't have any more questions, Olivia, please interrupt me if we do. But it is a process. It's not getting a job in consulting isn't always going to be like a right-away thing. It takes time and prep, and casing does take a lot of effort that, isn't something, it's just different from other industries. So one of the things I really have to remind people is don't get discouraged. It does take some work. If you're going through the process and you're not having as much luck with some of the big firms, going to do some time at a smaller firm, either an internship or maybe a year or even a few months at a smaller firm, is great training and practice. And once that's on your resume, consulting firms look on you much more favorably. But the truth is, it is going to take time. It's going to take hours and hours of practice. There's a lot to it, and it is, like I said, a different, unnatural kind of process. So it's something specific that if you want to do consulting, you have to accept, but it takes work. So know that going in. I guess, Olivia, you tell me if there's any questions. I'm happy to stay on for a minute or two, but otherwise, we've hit our hour. It was a lot of information, so I know it may take some time to sink in. And if you guys have follow-ups, you can reach out to Olivia, and she can recommend, programs to BRC that can be helpful for training, individual sessions with folks, to do practice cases, or to really help develop your own casing style, general sessions around networking and getting a job in consulting, or things you can do as part of the process that is helpful. So I recommend reaching out to her as well.
Yeah, definitely. So I still see some other questions, but I think I will collect those questions, and if you guys want to contact Nate, he's our mentor. If you want to practice case interviews for management consulting, please let me know, and I will set up time for you and Nate to do the case practice. And yeah, so I think thank you very much for joining the session, and thank you, Nate, for a great case prep session. And I think so since we already hit an hour, so I will really thank you for your attending this event. And so I'm going to type in our company website here. So if you have any questions, you can go to our website to schedule for a career consultation.
I'm going to stop presenting and turn things over to you, Olivia. Thank you, and thank you, everyone. Hope you all have a good evening. All right?
Thank you, Nate.
Take care. Bye-bye now. you